Path of Radiance was my introduction to the Fire Emblem series. I was a teenager and I chugged away at it in my parents' basement on breaks from boarding school, trying desperately to get through the incredibly long campaign before I had to go back. Because it was my first strategy game, I played on easy and fell for all sorts of newbie traps. I thought that Rolf was the best unit in the game because he was the only sniper available after Shannon left. I gave Soren knives because of how cool the animations were when Volk attacked enemies. And despite the fact that he's kind of a stinky unit, I became very attached to Ike, investing a lot of resources into him and making him into a hard carry of sorts. In addition to really liking the units, I became incredibly attached to this cast of characters. Jill was and remains my favorite character in the series, but I also grew attached to Ike and many of the other Grail mercenaries. Despite starting my Fire Emblem journey with Tellius, I didn't move on to Radiant Dawn until much later, playing it for the first time roughly a decade after I played Path of Radiance. I bought the game for $60, which at the time I thought was a ripoff. Old games are supposed to be cheaper than new ones, and $60 is the new game price. But I booted it up on my fresh Wii U and eagerly awaited finding out what Ike and the gang had been up to all this time. Instead, I was greeted by Micaiah, the game's other protagonist and leader of the Dawn Brigade. I was definitely disappointed at this. And from the looks of things online, I wasn't exactly alone in my disappointment. Micaiah is often regarded as one of the weakest lords in the series, hanging out with people like FE11 Marth, FE6 Roy, and FE7 Lyn. On the surface, I can see where this comes from. Micaiah is incredibly frail, which is not a great quality on a game over condition. She also gets story-based promotions, which is never a good sign, and hers tend to come at the worst possible moment. She doesn't get her tier 2 promotion until after you finish part 1, meaning you won't get to play with a promoted Micaiah for the entirety of the first portion of the game. Worse still, she is stuck in that tier 2 class until at the end of part 4 when you enter the tower, meaning that she will be once again a tier behind the rest of your contributing units. Compounding this issue further, once Micaiah promotes for the first time, her availability kind of tanks. She isn't around for any of Part 2, and there's only 3 maps that she's available in Part 3. And for one of those maps, she's locked behind a defense point and unable to participate in combat, simply using Physic and Purge to support people from the sidelines. Additionally, since she is one of the 2 main lords of the story, Micaiah's natural comparison is to Ike, the other main character and one of the best units in the game. While I dunked on FE9 Ike and I do truly believe he is a bad unit, the FE10 variant got a significant glow up. And Ike is far from the only broken character you get access to in Radiant Dawn. Nyla, the Black Knight, Tibarn, Har, the list goes on and on. With all of these factors working against her, it's easy to see how the squishy mage girl with a weak tome type has an uphill battle winning the hearts and minds of the Fire Emblem fanbase. However, today I am going to attempt to convince you that Micaiah is one of the most criminally underrated units in the entire franchise. This video is going to be structured very similarly to the Mercedes video that I did last year. We're going to take a deep dive into how Micaiah performs throughout the campaign. However, this time my intention is to highlight the ways in which she succeeds rather than her failures. So strap on in, it's going to be a long one. But in addition to giving Micaiah the acknowledgement she deserves, I would like to give the acknowledgement that my patrons deserve to them. So thank you to my pre-promotes, Jamie Collins, Marin Karen, Thick Molder, George Granville the 7th PM, Daniel Kalaskis, Jagan is a Nest, Tailored Muffin, Dr. Majalis, Herc, SUP, Gabe the Green, Control-Alt-Aegis, Jeff, and my Jagan, Autumn Kelsey. Y'all are wonderful, you make what I do possible, and if you're interested in supporting the channel, there is a link below that'll get you access to things like early videos, polls that decide on the channel direction, and some stuff that's too spicy to mention on YouTube. But on the topic of spice, let's get back to my hot takes about Micaiah. Part 1. The Silver-Haired Maiden. We will begin, fittingly, at the beginning. Micaiah first joins your army in 1-P. This is an extremely straightforward map, only giving you access to Edward, Micaiah, and Leonardo. Edward is definitely the strongest unit on this map, both offensively since he doubles all of the enemies, and defensively since he survives 3 hits at exactly 1 HP. Additionally, even in hard mode where weapon triangle is removed, he will have 100% accuracy against the brigands. Although I'm not sure how much of this is a result of his starting biorhythm being high. Micaiah, on the other hand, can only safely take 1 hit from the brigands as she will die to her second. However, she can attack from 2 range, meaning that she doesn't have to face a counter. She deals 10 damage since she targets resistance, but unfortunately she's too slow to double, so Edward still has better damage output. Editing Danny here, and I realized that Edward exactly doubles the brigands who do not roll up on speed, and considering Radiant Dawn does have random enemy stats, if the brigands roll up on speed, he doesn't double them, and as a result, he does less damage than Micaiah. So, arguably, they are closer to each other. I would still say Edward is probably better than her on this map, but it's not a huge deal. That being said, Micaiah and Edward actually work really well together on this map, as they can team up to kill enemies, since neither of them won rounds, but combined they will kill. Additionally, since Micaiah doesn't have to worry about eating a counter, she can spend turns healing Edward with the sacrifice skill at the cost of her HP, and then Edward can frontline since he can take multiple hits, and it's not a big deal. In case it's not clear, I think Micaiah is a better target for experience on Prologue than Edward is, so I like setting up kills with him and then taking them with her. However, a lot of Micaiah's mid and late game utility comes from places other than her stats, so if she doesn't get the experience, it's not the biggest deal in the world. Especially since the third unit, Leonardo, is kind of a good target for experience. He is noticeably worse than Micaiah and Edward on this map, since he lacks 1 range and therefore can't enemy phase, and he's the only one of the 3 of them who doesn't have 100% accuracy. Additionally, he does the least damage out of the 3 of them, but it's not a big deal. He can still get kills, and if you want to invest in him, this is a good place to. There is potentially an argument that giving early game experience to Leonardo so that he can hit level 10 and use a Master Seal to access crossbows to part 3 is a useful use of your time, but that is an argument for another time. Instead, I want to shift focus back to our leading lady. Personally, I think she does a little bit worse on this map than Edward, but it is still a fine performance, and at the end of the day, this map is pretty close to a playable cutscene, so it's not a huge factor. However, Chapter 1-1 is where Micaiah starts proving her value. Here we get Nolan, who is often considered one of the stronger early game units in Radiant Dawn, and it's easy to see why. He is bulkier than anyone we currently have, and he hits harder as well, capable of dealing almost twice as much damage as anyone else on our team. Well, if he hits, that is. The biggest thing holding back Nolan in the early game are the weapons that he has. A steel axe and a hand axe are going to be the only things he can use until we get access to the armory in Chapter 4. This means that he is going to consistently face accuracy problems. Depending on his biorhythm, he has between 70 and 90 hit in Chapter 1-1, and it only goes downhill from there. Despite this glaring flaw, Nolan is still pretty clearly the strongest unit on this map. Because he gets 4-rounded while everyone else gets 2-rounded, he can take advantage of the many 1-tile-wide choke points in order to hold off the enemies from killing your squishies. Since his attacks will deal about 2/3 of an enemy's health bar, he's pretty good at setting up kills for Leonardo and Micaiah as well. That being said, I would argue that Micaiah is a close second to his performance. Sure, there are plenty of enemies who one-round her on this map, but it's also fairly easy to take advantage of the narrow alleyways to keep her out of harm's way. Both she and Leonardo can safely attack enemies for roughly the same amount of damage, but she does it with better accuracy, and she has the option to use her turn to heal up Nolan or Edward instead. While this does come at the cost of HP, it's not really a huge cost, since she's getting one-rounded whether she has 1 HP or 15. Checking in on Edward, he has fallen from grace and is definitely the weakest unit on this map, although he still has roles to fill. Much like Micaiah and Leonardo, he's capable of attacking weakened enemies, but he does so from 1 range, so he does have to be prepared to eat a counter if he misses or fails to kill. These 2 maps establish the beginnings of a pattern, where Micaiah is never the strongest unit in your army, but she's usually pretty close to it. And I would argue that this pattern continues in 1-2, where Micaiah and Nolan are probably tied for second place in your army. Part of this is because Nolan's flaws start to become more apparent. His hit rates begin to fluctuate between 60 and 80% depending on his biorhythm, and he's slow enough to get doubled by enemy soldiers, which cuts into his bulk quite a bit. He's still bulkier than Edward, Leonardo, Micaiah, and Lara, but the lead is not as severe as it used to be. Like, Nolan gets 3-rounded by soldiers, while Micaiah gets 2-rounded by axe fighters. As such, I'm actually of the opinion that Nolan's bulk lead is less important than Micaiah's 1-2 range, accuracy, and ability to heal. You see, Sacrifice gets a little bit stronger with the addition of Lara. It sounds contradictory. After all, Lara's access to stabs means that Micaiah's ability to heal her allies is no longer a niche. However, it is now easier to utilize when you most need it. For the first 2 maps, if Micaiah's Sacrifice set her down to 1 HP, she would have to take a turn off to use a healing item before she could sacrifice again. This is still useful, as sometimes there are situations where you need to heal Nolan or Edward and also have them attack on the same turn, but it is harder to consistently use Sacrifice as a source of healing, because you're kind of banking Micaiah's future turns in order to heal up people in the present. However, with Lara available, you can choose to use Micaiah's Sacrifice to heal someone who desperately needs it, and you are instead banking either Micaiah or Lara's turn in the future to heal Micaiah up. The early game Dawn Brigade is quite weak, so it is pretty realistic that there are going to be some turns where both Edward and Nolan need a heal, and Lara can only do one of them. Micaiah can sacrifice to heal the other one, and then on a future turn where no one else needs healing, Lara can heal up Micaiah so that she's ready to sacrifice again. This will continue to be true throughout the rest of part 1, only replacing Nolan and Edward with Zehark and Tironio or whoever else is relevant for that chapter. However, Lara is not the only unit joining in 1-2 whose existence benefits Micaiah. Soth, the Jagan of the game, has an automatic A support with Micaiah, and an inherent bond support on top of that. Their affinities are Wind plus Dark, which means they will get 7.5 hit, 1 attack, and 15 avoid from this support. Additionally, their bond support grants them both 10% crit and 10% crit avoid. Both of these are activated by being within 3 tiles of each other, and they are quite beneficial to both units. Having an extra 7 hit in particular is super helpful because it can push Micaiah over the edge to reach 100% accuracy, which is pretty stellar. Additionally, the 1 extra might can sometimes push her over to kill thresholds. The 15% avoid, on the other hand, is mostly for Soth's benefit. Micaiah should not be frontlining enough that you are relying on her avoiding attacks. The last additional tool that Micaiah gains access to on this map is the Thani, which is her personal weapon and functionally her Lord's Rapier. It's weird, for some reason it's locked in a chest instead of starting in your inventory, but whatever. Radiant Dawn is a weird game. You can just lock the rapier in a chest with no explanation. Fine by me. Thani itself has 8 might and 100% accuracy, but that 8 might is elevated to 24 if she's fighting against Cavaliers or Armor Knights. This means that she's usually the best unit to take those enemies on, as often she's capable of one-shotting them at perfect accuracy, so it doesn't even matter if they have 1-2 range equipped. This holds true for the boss of this map, who is an Armor Knight. Micaiah will 1-round him with the Thani, whereas Soth 2-rounds him with the card, and everyone else does pretty poorly against him. As a result of all of these factors, I prefer Micaiah's performance on this map to Nolan's, but I think it's close enough that we can probably say they're both in second place for this map. The first place is pretty obviously Soth. He's just significantly bulkier than your other units, he doubles and deals more damage, he is just all around the best unit in your army, but that's what you expect from a Jagan. Still, Micaiah being the most useful non-Jagan unit on the map is definitely not what I would call a bad unit, and even if you personally value Nolan more than Micaiah, she's still better than Leonardo, Lara, and Edward on this map. Bronze Medal is still a medal. It's also worth noting that most people consider the early Dawn Brigade maps to be among the toughest in the game, and 1-3, which we are about to talk about, is the one that I personally think is the hardest map in the game. As you start out in a relatively difficult to defend position, have to face enemies from both sides, worry about recruiting Aaron, need to keep everyone alive for the game over condition, have enemies taking advantage of terrain to contend with, and the boss is a Cavalier who can outrange you and prove quite dangerous with his 1-2 range sword. So let's start by talking about him. He does 1-round Micaiah on average, but Micaiah is also capable of 1-rounding him if she hits 10 magic. She has 7 magic base and an 80% magic growth, so after 4 levels she's more likely to be able to 1-round him than not, and it's not especially difficult to get Micaiah 4 levels during the first 3 maps of the game. Remember, Prologue is just an EXP farm for whoever you want to feed it to, and 1-1 and 1-2 are also maps where she'll be contributing heavily due to the low number of units you have. She's at least going to get chip experience, but probably some amount of kill experience as well. If you're absolutely desperate, you can also abuse Sacrifice to get her more experience than she would naturally get by sacrificing to heal up units who are only missing 1 or 2 HP, since she gets 10 points of experience from every sacrifice used. For context, in a typical playthrough, I get Micaiah to around level 8 or 9 by the beginning of 1-3. It is worth noting that he deals 17 points of damage to Micaiah at base, so you need to get some combination of 3 points of HP or defense if you plan on doing this on enemy phase. However, on player phase, she has 100% accuracy, so just kill him on player phase. Like, I know he's on a horse, but there's also a lot of terrain around the area where you typically fight him, so it's not that hard to get him in a position where he can't attack Micaiah, but she can attack him. That being said, he's not the only scary enemy on the map who Thani is useful against. Micaiah can also use it to one-round the Armor Knights who guard the choke point, and it deals a not insignificant amount of damage even to non-armored, non-cavalier enemies. Micaiah is squishier than ever, getting one-rounded by a lot of enemies, but that just makes her into a glass cannon, and that's not an uncommon trait for mages. Hitting on resistance with perfect accuracy is just a very desirable trait at this point in the game. But Micaiah's not the only unit capable of hitting on resistance in Chapter 1-3. Because Ileana also joins you at the beginning of the map. She's pretty useful too, but she is held back by her anima type, that being Thunder. The base Thunder Tome has 3 might and 80% accuracy, whereas El Thunder has 5 might and 75% accuracy. This, combined with Ileana's piss-poor skill, means that she's not going to be seeing the perfect hit rates that Micaiah does, instead usually hovering around the 70% era. She doesn't even really get anything in exchange for this, because a base Thunder Tome and a base Light Tome have the same might, and Light just gets 20 extra accuracy for no reason. I mean, I guess Ileana has a little bit of crit on her weapons, but being able to hit the targets is unreliable enough. You really don't want to depend on 5% critical chances. The other new unit who joins on this map is Aaron, and this is going to upset some people, but he's also not particularly good. He meets a couple of important bulk thresholds over the next 3 maps, but other than that, there isn't much to him. His stat spread is incredibly similar to Nolan, albeit with a slightly more accurate weapon type. If you choose to invest in him, Aaron does have very good strength, skill, and defense growths. However, he joins at a very awkward time. It's not early enough that you can hyper-focus on him from the very start, but it's also shortly before you get a couple of other better investment projects, so he often ends up feeling like a short-term unit through no fault of his own. Still, he can be a little bit useful on this map as basically a more accurate copy of Nolan. However, unlike 1-2, I think the fact that Micaiah has Thani at the start of the map elevates her above both Aaron and Nolan, as the combination of superb player phase combat with Sacrifice as an emergency second heal makes her a slam dunk pick for the second best unit on 1-3, the hardest map in the game. One nice thing about Thani is you can kind of just spam it without worrying about conserving uses, because it has 45 durability, and you'll get a second copy near the end of part 1. So even if you go through the entire pages of Thani and care about Micaiah's combat in part 3, which you probably don't, she just gets another copy and can continue to make use of it. After 1-3, you gain access to the base for the first time, and as a result, methods of fixing the problems the non-Micaiah units in your army have had. You can use the Forge to make Soth daggers with higher might and 1-2 range, as well as give Nolan some more accurate axes, or you can purchase a bronze axe from the armory if you don't want to spend as much money and still fix some of Nolan's hit issues. You can also make plus hit plus might Thunder Tomes for Ileana if you want a pale imitation of the Thani. You can grab a Beast Killer to allow Soth to deal effective damage to Laguz in the upcoming map. You can also buy or forge better swords for Edward and Aaron, but personally I don't think this is the best way to spend your limited resources. My preference is forging axes for Nolan, forging a dagger for Soth, and purchasing the Beast Killer. And if you do this, both of them will perform better than Micaiah on the upcoming map. On that topic, let's talk about the Laguz map. You start out in the middle of a crowded room with 3 choke points you need to hold, and a bunch of Laguz surrounding you on all sides. There are 2 primary ways that you can tackle this map. The first is to play defensively. Hold the choke points, kill the Laguz as they come to you, and then push forward when there's only a few of them left. In this scenario, you have 4 units who meet important bulk thresholds. Meg can survive against 2/3 of the enemies on the map, only dying to tigers who have rolled up 1 point on speed. Aaron and Nolan can usually survive one round of combat against every unit on the map, and Seth should be able to survive multiple rounds of combat, depending on which enemies attack him, up to 3 or 4 before he's in any danger. A combination of Lara, Sacrifice, and Vulneraries can allow you to safely hold all 3 choke points for quite some time, but the northmost choke point is a little bit special, because it starts out with a breakable wall. All of the enemies on the map are locked to 1 range, and it takes 2 attacks from the Laguz to break the breakable wall. As a result, Ileana, Leonardo, and Micaiah can all attack over the wall to damage or potentially even kill the Laguz as they try to break down the barricade. Out of the 3, Micaiah will deal the most damage, but you do still need multiple units to team up if you want to kill the Tiger before he breaks the wall. That being said, you can accomplish this in a single player phase through a combination of rescue and shove. Of note, this strategy is the one where a plus hit Thunder Tome for Ileana is the most appealing, as Ileana plus Micaiah can reliably kill the Tiger, whereas Leonardo's physical damage kind of pales in comparison. However, as is the case with most defense maps, I believe that playing aggressively actually makes this map easier, and so instead of trying to hold the choke points, I push forward my units who are capable of doing heavy damage. And hey, wouldn't you look at that, Micaiah is also capable of dealing heavy damage on player phase. She and Ileana can still team up to kill the Northern Laguz before they break the wall. Beast Killer Seth and Thani Micaiah are 2 of your best damage dealers if you are just trying to push forward on player phase. That being said, in order to kill all of the Laguz in the south, you will still need to take advantage of Aaron, Nolan, Ileana, and even Leonardo potentially. Aggressively pushing into the southern portion of the map can allow you to kill Laguz before they attack you, and then let you take advantage of a single 1-tile-wide choke point in the bottom left in order to more easily pick off the stragglers. Typically, I send Seth on his own to the right-hand side of the map to deal with that half of the army, while everyone else handles the left-hand side of the map, which can be trivialized a little bit more easily with the multiple 1-tile-wide choke points that you can park Nolan or Aaron inside of. From here, Micaiah can contribute with Thani at 2 range in order to deal significant chunks to the Laguz. Even if they're transformed, they don't tend to have the best resistance. I do think the boost in accuracy that access to the armory and forges give Nolan means that he is once again probably tied with Micaiah in terms of utility, and Seth is definitely better than her. But still, this is a very good place to be for someone who is often considered one of the worst units in the game. I mean, on most maps, even Ike has 2 units in the army who are better than him, through some combination of Titania, Har, and Nyla. 1-5 is the last of what I would consider the difficult early game maps, and here is where Micaiah's utility starts to slip. She still acts as a quite strong player phase nuke, but it can be more difficult to find a position where she is safe from all enemies due to the open nature of the starting area. Since this is a survive map, after you defeat the initial wave of enemies, Micaiah finds herself without much useful that she can do. Volug and Seth are the best units to run off on their own, to protect the green units and steal side objectives respectively. And Micaiah lacks the bulk threshold to appropriately choke the ledge, which Aaron, Meg, and Nolan can reach. She can use Sacrifice to heal up these units if necessary, and there are later reinforcements that she can kill with a Fanny Bomb or 2, but she doesn't stand out amongst the other units in your army. The only units I would say she definitely performs better than are Edward and Leonardo, since you could argue back and forth whether her offenses or the bulk thresholds are more important. But now we hit the point in the game where Radiant Dawn starts handing you combat gods on just about every map. Tyronio, Zehark, Tormod, Moaram, Nyla, the Black Knight who is literally freaking invincible, Jill if you train her up, and of course everybody's favorite combat goddess, Fiona. The mere existence of these units starts to make even Seth look bad, so it is difficult for Micaiah to hold up a candle. Thani is still quite useful, especially in Chapter 6 for dealing with generals and paladins, which there are a lot of, and Sacrifice still occasionally comes in clutch as a second heal, but by and large, Micaiah's strongest contribution during this time period is the support bonuses that she offers Seth, and that is definitely damning by small praise. I do want to note 2 things about this time period. The first being that she still performs better than units like Edward, Leonardo, Aaron, and Meg would. And the second is that being worse than Z-Hark or Tyronio or Nyla is not a death sentence by any means. These are unreasonably broken units. Just because Micaiah doesn't measure up doesn't mean that she belongs in the garbage. I will mostly skip over 1-6, 1-7, 1-8, and 1-E, only mentioning that on all of these maps there are several one-range enemies that she can just hit really hard with a Thani Bomb, sometimes for effective damage. She's frail enough that she gets one-rounded by just about everything, but she can still player phase nuke and help you advance towards the map's objective. However, I do want to talk about 1-9, because Micaiah is uniquely bad in this map, and I think that gives a lot of people a sour taste in their mouth. Chapter 1-9, One Survives, is one of the worst designed Fire Emblem maps of all time. You only have access to 2 units. Micaiah, who is frail enough that most enemies, if not all enemies, will one-round her, and the Black Knight, who is quite literally invincible. The Black Knight has access to Etard and can kill every enemy at 1-2 range with 100% accuracy. In comparison, Micaiah has Thani, which I have been hyping up as dealing a lot of damage, but without effective damage it isn't going to one-shot anyone. On most maps this is still valuable, as she can knock an enemy down to kill range without facing a counter and then someone else can finish them off. However, on 1-9 there are 2 problems with this strategy. The Black Knight does not need any help finishing off these enemies, as he doubles them and deals about 500% the amount of damage he needs to. Additionally, the majority of enemies on 1-9 have 1-2 range. The concept of the map is a puzzle. You are meant to find out how you're supposed to position Micaiah and the Black Knight on every single turn so that you keep her alive and allow him to kill as many enemies as possible to make the next turn easier. On its own, this is a somewhat interesting concept for a map, however, its puzzle and fixed nature means that it won't be different on repeat playthroughs, and I think it ultimately fails as a result of that. But, of course, there is a wrinkle that causes it to fail even on a first playthrough, and that is the fact that this map, for no reason, is Fog of War. Like, I know the story reason is that it takes place at nighttime, and all of the maps that take place at nighttime are Fog of War, and all of the maps that take place at daytime are not Fog of War. However, from a mechanical perspective, the Fog of War adds nothing and subtracts everything. It is supposed to be a puzzle map, but you are obscured all of the information that you would use for the puzzle. You don't know where the enemies are, and new ones show up every turn. You can't know what a safe position for Micaiah is, and frequently you will have to reset if you don't just look up a guide online. Now, veterans of the Tellius games might think the solution is obvious. Just have the Black Knight rescue Micaiah, since he definitely has more calm than her. But yeah, no, he can't do that. For some reason, if you try to rescue Micaiah with the Black Knight, you get dialogue saying that she doesn't want his help. Presumably this is because it would trivialize the puzzle they set up for us, but if they wanted us to engage with the puzzle they set up for us, they should not have given us Fog of War. This map is incredibly frustrating, however, I find it difficult to hold that against Micaiah. After all, no one else in your army is doing anything on this map. Everyone else isn't even allowed to participate. Sure, Micaiah doesn't do anything for you on this map, but the frustrations caused by her dying aren't a result of her being a bad unit. It's the result of the map deciding that you need to suddenly play this weird mini puzzle game where all of the information is obscured from you, and they take a glass cannon unit and ask you to keep her alive while also not knowing where the enemies are. It's stupid, and I hate it, but I don't hold it against Micaiah. One of my friends refers to maps like these as playable cutscenes with a fail condition, and I think that is a good way to describe it. There aren't multiple iterations of how you play this map out. There is one solution, you have to find it, and once you do, you repeat it and execute it every time you play through Radiant Dawn. So, with all of that out of the way, let's do a quick overview of Micaiah's arc during part 1 of Radiant Dawn. For the first half of the segment, Micaiah is typically the second best unit on the map, constantly being handed new tools that are useful for her in a variety of situations. She functions as an extremely effective, albeit extremely fragile glass cannon, whose utility goes up the more aggressive you get. However, while playing defensively, she can do significant damage from behind bulky units and choke points, and act as emergency healing if you need 2 units topped off in the same turn. Once we hit the turning point halfway through part 1, she gets overshadowed by the uniquely broken units the Dawn Brigade is handed, but remains capable of dealing significant chunks of damage to one-range locked enemies so long as there is someone there to clean up the scraps for her. Overall, I think that this makes for a very strong unit in the early game. But Radiant Dawn is incredibly strong, so we're not done yet. At the end of part 1, Micaiah gets a 4-story promotion. She gains quite a few stats from this, but if we're being perfectly honest, her stats have started to fall off at this point. The more important thing that Micaiah gains, however, is C rank staves. Her light rank is also elevated to C if she hadn't reached it already, but considering she starts at D rank and 40 combats will get her to C, she probably doesn't actually gain any light rank off her promotion. Still, C staves is going to be incredibly useful when we return to Micaiah's army in Part 3. Part 3. Intersecting Vows. Micaiah is only available for 3 chapters in Part 3. 3-6, A Reason to Fight, 3-12, The Price, and 3-13, Blood Contract. While I personally think the beginnings of Part 1 are harder, I won't deny that these 3 maps can be quite challenging for new and experienced players alike. 3-6 is the Laguz Swamp map, where all of your enemies are cats and tigers, and most of the terrain is swamp, aside from the island that you start on in the bottom left corner. Depending on how you invested your resources in Part 1, you should have around 3 to 4 competent combat units for this map, with options like Trueblade Zehark, Promoted Wyvern Jill, Tarvos Nolan, S-Rank Volug, Beast Vo Leonardo, and Beast Killer Soth, all being somewhat viable on this map. The common trait that these units share, however, is they're usually 2 or 3 rounded, or in the case of Leonardo, 1 rounded, so he's irrelevant to this conversation, because Micaiah's main utility on 3-6 is her ability to heal. Because your primary combat units are 2 or 3 rounded on this map, they need quite a bit of healing to stay safe. You can either have them spend their turn chugging vulneraries, or you can have Laura, Micaiah, and the Yellow Bishop heal them up. Now, the Yellow Bishop is a very bad option. It's AI controlled, and while it seems to prioritize healing your units, it will sometimes just heal someone you don't care about being top and result in your units getting killed. You should never trust your unit's safety to NPCs. In fact, most of the reason that I bring up the Yellow Bishop is that I don't think his existence is a counter-argument to the utility Micaiah provides as a healer on 3-6. Instead, it makes sense to leave the healing up to Laura and Micaiah. Micaiah is slightly better at this role because she has a higher magic stat and she will guaranteed be promoted for the +1 move, but it's not so much of an advantage that Laura is irrelevant. In many cases, there are going to be 2 units who require healing on the same turn, and so they'll both have something to do. Now, both Laura and Micaiah are frail enough to get 1-rounded by cats and tigers, but thankfully, you can use the swamp to your advantage, as it cuts down on their movement and allows you to create safe places to position your healers so they can top up the rest of your army. Worst case scenario, there is also a physic available in the shop in this map, and I definitely recommend purchasing it, because it will allow Micaiah and Laura to heal up any units who are too far away for them to get to safely, or if you send Jill flying into the swamp, they can keep her topped up as well. Generally, I think it's very important to take full advantage of your player phase actions on this map, which is why I prefer using Physic and Heal as opposed to Vulneraries to keep my units at full HP. While Micaiah and Laura are certainly less impressive on this map than the people doing combat, they are nonetheless contributing in a concrete way. And that's more than you can say about someone like Meg or Fiona. On the surface, 3-12 appears to be a similar story. This is another map where you start out in a defensible position and need to kill a certain number of enemies while also keeping the backline safe. However, there are a few differences. The first is the existence of a 2-tile-wide choke point that is by far the easiest way to tackle this map. If you sit 2 reasonably bulky units in the choke point and just have them vulnerary on player phase, you can slowly but surely wear down the foes you need to and get through the map without needing too much help from Micaiah. There will still be the occasional turn where you absolutely need to delete an enemy on player phase, but for the most part, units can be self-sufficient, healing with items instead of relying on staffers. Of course, that's only if you want to play the map defensively. Now, I am of the opinion that this map is much easier to tackle defensively, but if you want to, there are plenty of ways to push forward and take the fight to the enemies instead. In this case, you are actually going to lean on Micaiah's physicking to top off your aggressive units. Since you can no longer depend on only getting attacked by 1 or 2 enemies per turn, they are going to want to be at full HP as frequently as possible, while also deleting enemies on their player phase. Cards on the table, my personal preference for playing this map is to hold the choke point, and as a result, Micaiah ends up not being especially valuable for me, But if you are interested in playing fast or just want to be daring, she can definitely provide a little bit of utility to keep Zehark, Jill, or whoever else you're charging forward topped up. But then of course we get to the infamous 313. Yeah, there's not much getting around this one. This is probably the worst map for Micaiah, at least the worst map other than 1-9. This is yet another defense map. And while there are certainly choke points you can hold, there are also a good deal of flying enemies, and so you do want to be proactive in order to prevent them from reaching the line that if they cross you get a game over. As is the case whenever player phase combat is valuable, staffing's utility goes up as well. So with that in mind, you would expect this to be a map that Micaiah is at least somewhat useful in. After all, she can heal someone up who doesn't have the action economy D to vulnerary. But not for the first time, the game does something incredibly mean to her. Micaiah is locked behind the defend point. The story explanation is the silver-haired maiden is too valuable to see the front lines, and it does make sense from a flavor perspective. I don't hate the idea of the leader being on the back lines and everyone else protecting them. What I do hate is that this means that Micaiah functionally cannot participate in large portions of the map. The game gives you a couple of tools to try to make her useful in the backlines. For example, you can purchase your second physic staff in the shop for this map, and you probably should, physic is quite valuable. Additionally, you are handed a purge tome at the start of the map. Presumably this is intended to allow Micaiah to pick off enemies from far away. However, these are just band-aid solutions, and they honestly don't even work especially well as that. Physic is nice, but since Micaiah is stuck so far in the backline, there are going to be people who want to heal who are just too far away for her to reach. Purge, on the other hand, is generally too weak to kill enemies, so you're just softening them up from far away. And it's only 5 uses. This is a defend for 12 turn maps, meaning that if you want to play the map out to its conclusion as a defend map, there are going to be bare minimum 7 turns where Micaiah just cannot participate in combat at all whatsoever, as if any enemies reach close enough for her to attack from 2 range, they cross the line, and then you get a game over. But of course, the real nail in the coffin is the fact that I said if when I was talking about playing this map out to turn 12, because there is a far, far easier way to end Blood Contract, and that is to kill Ike. Volug, Jill, Zehark, and Tironio can all act as an Ike killer with various upsides and downsides to each, potentially allowing you to clear the map as early as turn 1 or 2. If this is the strategy you choose to employ, then Micaiah quite literally cannot contribute to it. Purge does not have the length to reach Ike, she can't shove anyone because she's above a ledge, and no one's going to need healing because all you're doing is killing the boss and then moving on. It's worth noting that characters like Edward, Fiona, and Meg probably aren't going to be your Ike killer, and as a result, Micaiah is not the only one unlikely to participate in this strategy, but she is the only one who quite literally never will be able to be your Ike killer. Like, if you desperately want to get the clip of Meg killing Ike, you can always grind her up to 20-20-20 on a petrified priest. While Micaiah's performance in Part 3 is definitely worse than her Part 1 performance, I don't think it's entirely worthless. She transitions into a solid utility role, and even though 313 is quite mean to her, 3-6 and 3-12 are maps that she can definitely help on depending on your strategy. Now, let's see how this translates to Part 4. Part 4. Gods and Men. Part 4 is a frustrating portion of the game. You get several enemy spam route maps back to back to back, presumably designed so you can train up units from scratch. What feels like it could be a cool concept, dividing your units into separate armies to take on different maps, ends up just being really weighed down by the fact that all of those maps kinda just suck. Micaiah is forced into the Silver Army since it's named after her, and as a result, she can participate in 4-P and 4-3 before entering the tower. Her performance does not exactly stand out on either of these maps. She is stuck in Tier 2 as she has to wait for a story promotion that happens when you enter the tower, and as a result, she's going to be, say it with me, worse at combat than the other units around her. I mean, you can't even really focus on hyper-training her as you could some other scrubs because she caps out at level 20. Units who are significantly worse than her, such as Edward and Fiona, can at the very least be trained against the waves and waves of enemies so that you get your screenshot of them coming in first place in kills. Micaiah cannot, both because of the aforementioned level cap and because her stats are going to be duty regardless. All she offers you is being a staffer, and this is a lot less useful in Part 4 than it is in Part 3. Part of this is because it is no longer something fairly exclusive to her. In Part 3, Lara and Micaiah are the only two units who have access to staves. This means that if you want staff healing, you have to use one of them, and you probably want enough staff healing to use both of them. Once we enter Part 4, however, you can promote any of the anima mages to Archsage to get staff access. Additionally, Riss is capable of using staffs at base. Oliver, Bastion, Mist, and Elincia can as well, but they're locked to different routes than Micaiah, and as a result, they're not really competing with her for utility. Still, an excess of supply is only half of the problem, because there's also just less demand for a staffer when you have access to powerful units like the Laguz Royals. Naesala and Skramir are both locked to Micaiah's route, and while they do appreciate healing from time to time, they need it a lot less than the scrubs she was assisting in the Dawn Brigade. Additionally, because Micaiah's army passes through the desert, many players choose to send powerful flyers such as Har, Ulki, and Janaf with her. As your combat carriers get larger, the amount of utility provided by staffing goes down. That being said, Micaiah does still have something valuable she can do as a free staffer in 4-3. And that is heal status. This map features enemies with L Silence and L Sleep, both of which have absurd range. By equipping a Restore staff, Micaiah is able to self-cure her own status, and she can use Sacrifice or the Restore staff in order to cure other people's status. Because she is a magical unit, she isn't held back by desert movement, and because she has low constitution, she can get shoved by almost anyone in the army. This means that she can generally reach whatever unit needs to have their status stealed on time. It's not game breaking, but it is a genuine contribution that she makes to the army, which is more than like half of the units in Radiant Dawn can say for their Part 4 performance. I mean, heck, it's arguably more than half of the units in Radiant Dawn can say for their entire performance. However, even I, Micaiah's greatest defender, will admit that these maps are rough for her. That does turn around soon though, because we are now entering the Tower, and the Tower brings with it something that greatly adds to Micaiah's utility. No, I'm not talking about her promotion, it is far too late to matter. What I'm talking about is the fact that your army gets greatly reduced in size. For the last 5 maps of the game, you are only allowed to use Ike, Micaiah, Soth, Sanaki, Enna, Kurthnaga, your Heron, and 10 units that you bring into the Tower. There's also some dragons that you recruit along the way, and Sephirim if you are doing New Game Plus, but the dragons' contributions are largely irrelevant to Micaiah, and Laren is around for less than 1 map. The thing about the Tower limiting you to only 10 characters is that at this point, you have a lot of powerful units to choose between. Nyla, Har, Meg, Tibarn, the list goes on. You even get handed 2 very powerful lions right outside the tower gates, just begging you to bring them inside. And as a result, it becomes pretty hard to justify bringing units in just for their staff access. Especially because Sorin, Khalil, Tormod, Ilyana, Peleus, Oliver, Riss don't exactly have the greatest combat. While it is true that mages are useful on 4E5 for dealing with the plus defense tile auras, you get free access to Sanaki, and she's generally going to have better combat than any of the Archsages you can pick. Her downside is not having access to staves, but Micaiah covers that for you. And as a result, these 2 units together kind of invalidate every Archsage in the game from being a good choice into the Tower. Now, the 2 staff units we haven't talked about yet are Mist and Elincia. Mist is a training project and a pretty frustrating one. She does have a good payoff, being one of the only 2 mounted staffers in the game, and her growths are also pretty alright. Like, she's not going to be a combat goddess or anything, but it is very workable. That being said, she joins alongside units who are just much better investment targets than her, and so you're probably not training her unless you're doing it for memes. I love using Mist, but she's not an ideal tower pick in most situations. Elincia, on the other hand, is quite useful. The main reason is that she has access to high movement alongside the rescue staff, which is crucial for fast clears of some of the tower floors. She's not even a bad pick if you're playing slowly, because free access to staffs plus Canto is a very good combination of traits. Still, the fact that Micaiah is a free staffer in the tower is quite useful, and I think she should be given credit for the fact that her mere existence makes an entire class of units suboptimal picks for endgame teams, as without her you would probably want one of the Archsages just for staff access. But enough preamble, let's zoom in on every floor in the tower and see just how much she contributes. Floor 1 is a large route map, where every enemy is a general or a bishop, with the exception of a single sniper. Micaiah can use Thani Bomb on generals to deal decent chunks of damage, but she's never going to be one-shotting them, and many of them have 1-2 range, so her main utility here is staffing. However, as this is a clunky route map, there is a good deal of staffing to be done. Before entering the tower, you have the opportunity to buy infinite physics staffs, so I'm going to assume she has every physic that she needs for the rest of the game. As a result, most of what Micaiah does in this map is hide in a corner and spam physic on enemies who need a heal. And yeah, this is useful, this is progress, like staff bot out of 10, I appreciate it. Using sacrifice to heal statuses is once again useful, thanks to the existence of global silence staffs. Micaiah will never be your best unit on 1-E-1 since you have access to the Royals, Ike, etc., but she's also far from useless. She arguably does more than Kurthnaga and definitely does more than Soth. 1-E-2, on the other hand, she quite literally does nothing to contribute towards your main objective, although it is a little bit unfair to hold this against her, as the map's main objective is having Ike duel the Black Knight, and there's a barrier that separates him from the rest of the army. Not even Physic can penetrate it. Technically speaking, the only units who can participate in this fight are Ike and his support partner, due to what I assume is an oversight. There is a side objective to rush down and get the Wishblade, and Micaiah can theoretically act as a rescue bot in this, although if you brought Elincia or a Mounted Mist, they are obviously better at this role due to the higher movement. Still, Micaiah being shovelable means that she can potentially rescue someone to kill Leviel and get the Wishblade. It's not the main objective, but it is a way that she can contribute in the tower. 4E3 is another map where Micaiah can potentially contribute by being a shovelable rescue bot if you want to rush the boss kill. However, if you're playing the map more slowly, Micaiah can also contribute by, once again, spamming Physic, and potentially hiding in a corner with Sanaki and trading a Blessed Purge Tome back and forth. You see, in between 4E2 and 4E3, you get to pick one weapon per unit and make them infinite durability. And if you brought a Purge Tome, then both Sanaki and Micaiah can just take potshots at dragons throughout the course of the map. Considering that the red dragons have low resistance but very high defense, it is useful to have someone who's able to hit their lower resistance. Micaiah and Sanaki can perform this role, and they can do it safely from a distance. As a result, I think Micaiah is very useful whether you're playing fast or slow on this map as well. 4E4 is a game that desperately wants you to rush the boss kill, because there are infinite reinforcements starting from turn 1, and enemies can teleport throughout the map in order to hit all of your units, or just have several of them teleport and gang up on someone who you thought was safe. There's not really a viable slow strategy to this, and as a result, Physic and Restore are no longer viable tools in Micaiah's arsenal. That being said, she is still a shovelable rescue bot, and so if you didn't bring Elincia or Mist, she's very good at getting units down to kill the boss. If you did bring one of them into the tower, then they're probably better at that job than her, although she can still Hamurn the rescue staff because it's probably getting low on uses. The final map, 1-U5, is another fairly movement-intensive chapter, and Micaiah can once again assist with this by being a shovelable rescue botter. However, there are also some plus defense tile auras that you're going to want to attack, and Micaiah can theoretically do this, although oftentimes she will face the retaliation damage and die if you do. Micaiah's main usefulness is the possibility of rescue and Physic, and if you're playing extra slowly, she can also do some restore stuff, since there's global silence and global paralysis attacks that Ashera has. That being said, I would recommend against playing this map slowly, much like the previous one, infinite reinforcements who can teleport around and some fragile game over conditions. I don't think that's a recipe for success. Conclusion. Micaiah begins the game as an extremely potent but extremely frail glass cannon, spending the hardest part of the game as your second or third best unit fairly consistently. While her performance dips as the game progresses, upon promotion, she transitions into a very valuable utility role for an army that desperately needs it, providing healing, status recovery, and eventually movement tech. Her status as a free deploy in the endgame goes a long way towards reducing the usefulness of other utility units, since she can replace them for free, whereas they cost a tower slot. While Micaiah will never be an S tier due to the nutso units that Radiant Dawn hands you out at every available opportunity, she's nowhere near as bad as meme tier units like Lyre and Kaisha, and significantly better than some characters who are considered staples, like Gatri and Mia. Due to the wide variety of help that she provides at different points in the game, I think there is a strong argument for Micaiah being a top 15 unit in Radiant Dawn. And with a cast as big as this, that alone should exclude her from the conversations of who are the worst lords in the series. Path of Radiance Ike, Blazing Blade Lyn, Sacred Stones Erica, and the like can fight over the title of Shit Lord. Micaiah does not belong in the competition, and it's time we acknowledge that she's much closer to a Crom than she is to an Eliwood. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, I would really appreciate you hitting the like button. It helps to boost the video in the algorithm and let other people find my work. If you're interested in more of my content, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so that you can see it when a new video goes live. I make video essays like this every Friday and tend to upload Let's Plays on a nearly daily basis. If there's something you think I missed about the main numericals, let me know in the comments below, or hit me up on Discord, there's a link in the description. Thank you once again to my Patreons, and I hope that everyone who watched this has a wonderful day.